Spending years of your life perfecting an invention, watching it grow from a messy sketch into something investors valued at $1 million, only to sit in a boardroom and hear your boss erase you from the story in front of everyone. That's exactly what happened to me. They toasted with champagne, they called themselves visionaries, and they laughed as if I was just a shadow in the corner. My name, Inessa, never left their lips. But what they didn't know is that I had already filed the patent under my name, a year before they ever thought this deal was real. I sat there, listening to their empty speeches, smiling while my hands itched to throw the truth on the table and watch their empire collapse. I didn't, not yet. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't stopping the party, it's letting them believe they've won, right before you rip the ground out from under their feet. And when I finally did, their million-dollar dream turned into their worst nightmare. Let me tell you the whole story from the beginning. My name is Inessa, and the day they tried to erase me from my own invention began with a hiss of champagne and the soft click of a conference room door sealing shut. The air smelled like burnt espresso and lemon polish, and the projector threw a clean blue light across a table crowded with crystal flutes and glossy investor packets. At the center of every page, in numbers big enough to stun a heartbeat, sat $1 million. The buyout for the technology one had nursed from a scribble in a coffee-stained notebook to a living system humming on our lab bench. My manager, Victor, navy suit, hair he'd shellacked into obedience, lifted his glass and said, "This is what leadership looks like," and the partners chuckled like they'd just watched him build a rocket with his bare hands. He did not say my name. He did not say Inessa wrote the kernel, Inessa solved the timing drift, Inessa stayed until 3 a.m., the night the array misfired and set off the sprinkler. He said, "Our team," meaning his signature. One of the directors, the kind who measures human worth in watch weight, leaned toward Victor and murmured, "The IP assignment paperwork. She's signed, yes?" Victor swirled his champagne like a TV villain and smirked. "She's an engineer. She likes equations, not contracts. We'll tidy it up after signing." He said she the way people say stain. I kept my face neutral and traced the moon-shaped watermark on my glass with my thumb, because it kept my hands from shaking with a reaction that would have looked, in their eyes, like weakness. They thought I didn't know that the patent was everything. They thought I couldn't possibly have anticipated this moment. They were wrong. I had walked into the county clerk's office a year ago, in a thrifted blazer with a missing button, and filed the patent under my own name. I had notarized it, overnight the copies, and paid for a digital timestamp service, because I knew someday someone would look at a room like this and decide they could write me out of it. The folder sat at home in my desk, beside a dried eucalyptus branch and a photo of my mother at 23, looking like she dared the world to blink first. Every time Victor smiled, I felt the paper on my fingertips again, textured, certain mine. For one loud second, I pictured myself standing, sliding the original from my bag, letting it fall open across the polished wood like a curtain reveal. I pictured the quick-drawn breath, the half-second where nobody talks because they're recalculating their future, the way Victor's eyes would go flat and cold like a shutter. But no, I wanted them to climb higher. I wanted them to pose for the little PR photos the junior associate kept composing with her phone, closer, closer. Let's get the logo, wanted them to taste the sugar on their tongues and call it permanent. When you have been invisible long enough, patience is not a virtue, it's a blade you learn to hold by the handle. To vision, Victor declared. To management, someone added. To extracting value, a partner with perfect teeth said, and I almost laughed, because extracting was the truest thing spoken all morning. I swiveled my attention to the fine print because details calm me, closing date, escrow, deliverables, a throwaway clause about best efforts to secure additional IP assignments from employees. There it was, the tiny trapdoor they'd planned to hustle me through once the ink dried. I tucked that knowledge into the quiet place where I keep the steps of my plan. The first time Victor tried to make me small, I was 22, and he told me not to bring up latency in front of the board because it makes them nervous. I went home and learned everything about latency until I could draw it on a napkin with a broken pencil. The second time, He accepted an award for innovation and thanked the spirit of collaboration, while I wrapped electrodes in the dark lab and pretended the applause on the live stream wasn't for my hands. The third time, I bought a fireproof document bag. Today would be the fourth time and the last. Inessa, Victor said suddenly, sharp as a snapped string, and 30 faces pivoted. Say a few words about the implementation. The word was chosen carefully. It gives credit to no one, the way a spotlight can blind as easily as it can illuminate. Of course, I said, and stood. My voice did not shake. We built a system that self-corrects under load. It wasn't obvious at first. We learned it listening to the failure, not the success. Eyes narrowed. Investors hear risk even when you say learning. But the failure taught us the architecture we needed, I added, and watched relief relax a line of jaws. Victor nodded like a conductor taking credit for a violinist's bow arm and slid his hand across the table toward the signature packet. I watched that hand the way you watch a teetering vase, half afraid, half detached, strangely curious how loud the shatter will be. Under the table, my phone buzzed, one small vibration, the signal from a courier I had hired 2 days ago, when I saw the meeting title change from Technical Review to Celebration. Delivered. For copies, sealed, timestamped, addressed, General Counsel, Lead Partner, Victor. My patent. My cover letter. My terms. If they signed anything before opening those envelopes, it would be their mistake, not mine. I sat. The junior lawyer cleared his throat. Before signatures, he began, voice careful. There were materials delivered. Victor's smile thinned. Later, he said. Of course he did. Control is a costume he can't take off. The GC frowned. We should review anything material to IP. A murmur moved like a draft around the room. Victor's fingers, immaculate and tanned, rested atop the packet. He did not move them. I felt my pulse slow to something like pleasure. If there's a question, I said lightly, I'm happy to clarify. A partner glanced at me as if realizing, for the first time, that I had a spine. He gestured to an assistant. An envelope slid across to him. He slid it with a silver letter opener and read, and when his eyes flicked to Victor, I saw it, the click of comprehension, the math changing mid-equation. This indicates the core patent is held personally, he said, neutral as snow. Silence settled, soft but heavy. Victor cracked a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's a misunderstanding, he said smoothly. She means a provisional filing. I said, and my voice felt like a key turning, a granted patent with assignment to me. The partner looked from the document to the $1 million line to me, as if triangulating a storm. Without the patent holder's license, he said slowly, this deal cannot close. A last bubble of laughter rose in me and dissolved. I did not laugh. I let the quiet do the work. Victor's jaw pulsed once, a muscle twitch you only notice if you've sat across from a man for 5 years while he took bows you bought. He leaned in, smile razor thin. Inessa, he murmured, step outside with me. Of course, I said, and stood again, because this is the dance. Erase, minimize, extract. But as I reached for the door, I felt 30 pairs of eyes follow, and for the first time, they did not look past me. They looked at me. Victor's breath was mint and fury in the hallway. What do you think you're doing? He hissed. Protecting my work, I said. Protecting our company, he snapped. You'll blow the deal. No, I said, and the truth settled in my bones like a light turning on in every room of a house. I will decide the terms of the deal. He opened his mouth, threat, bargain, both, but the door behind us clicked, and the lead partner stepped out with the general counsel. Their expressions were the particular blank of people who have remembered something inconvenient. That value doesn't come from smiles, it comes from rights. Miss Cade, the partner said, and for the first time my name sounded like an address, not an afterthought. Perhaps we should return to the table and discuss an amended structure. Victor pivoted toward me, a storm trapped in a glass. I met his eyes and smiled, not sweet and not cruel, just certain. I had been invisible long enough. It was time for them to see me, and for Victor to learn how it feels to be erased at the edge of $1 million signature. The moment I stepped back into that conference room, it felt like walking into a different climate, Gone was the careless heat of champagne laughter, replaced by a chill so sharp it prickled the back of my neck. The investors were no longer leaning comfortably in their leather chairs. They were upright, eyes darting between me, Victor, and the man holding my patent letter like it was radioactive. My pulse pounded, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear, it was from control. I had just shifted the entire balance of the room, and every second that passed tightened my grip. Victor tried to reclaim the narrative, launching into his well-rehearsed lines about collaborative spirit and misunderstandings in paperwork, but the words rang hollow now. I sat down, folded my hands on the table, and let him dig his own grave. The lead partner cleared his throat, eyes narrowing. "Mr. Crane, if Ms. Cade holds the patent, your authority to close this deal is in question." A flash of panic crossed Victor's face before he masked it with that thin smile. "Gentlemen, let's not lose sight of what's at stake here. $1 million. We all win if we stick together." He shot me a look sharp enough to cut, but I met it with calm, because the more desperate he grew, the stronger I felt. One of the investors, an older woman with steel-gray hair and an expression carved from years of watching egos implode, turned to me and asked, "Is it true, Ms. Cade? You are the sole patent holder?" Every eye was on me now, waiting, weighing, and for once my name wasn't an afterthought, it was the pivot point. "Yes," I said, steady as a gavel. "Filed. Granted. Irrevocable." I pulled a certified copy from my bag, sliding it across the table like a card in a high-stakes poker game. The silence afterward was delicious. Victor's jaw flexed again, his composure cracking like ice under weight. "She's sabotaging us," he snapped, slamming his palm on the table. "She doesn't understand the bigger picture. Without management, this is worthless. She needs us." His voice rose, but with every word, I could see the investors recalculating, shifting loyalties. One of them muttered, "What we need is the patent holder, not the manager." Victor's face drained of color. He tried to pivot, throwing me a poisonous smile. "Inessa, let's be reasonable. You don't want to burn bridges, do you? Let's sign it all over and I'll make sure you get recognized." Recognized. Not paid, not respected, just recognized. It was the same bone he'd tossed me 100 times before, wrapped in different packaging. I leaned forward, and for the first time in my life in that building, I let the steel in my voice show. "Victor, I didn't come this far for recognition. I came for ownership. And I already have it." The gray-haired investor smiled faintly, like she'd just decided who to back. Victor's eyes flicked around the room, realizing the tide had turned, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker there. He tried one last card, intimidation. He leaned in close, voice low enough for only me to hear. "You think you're untouchable? I made you. I can break you." I smiled back, whispering, "Try it. Just try it." Because what he didn't know was that the courier had not only delivered my patent to this room, but also filed copies with the state's corporate registry, making my claim public record by the hour. Even if he tried to bury me, the truth was already uncontainable. But before I could savor that thought, Victor snapped into full-blown panic mode. He pulled a binder from his briefcase, slamming it onto the table. "These are drafts, employment contracts, assignment clauses," she agreed in spirit. He flipped pages wildly, but every sheet he showed only proved one thing: he'd never gotten my signature. The investors leaned back, unimpressed, some even smirking now. "Gentlemen, ladies," I said, taking the moment, "this deal can proceed, but it will proceed on my terms. Licensing through me, or not at all." The shift was seismic. Where once I had been invisible, now every gaze locked on me as the axis. Victor sputtered, reaching for arguments that had already died in his throat. But I could see something else in his eyes now, something darker, desperation morphing into rage. And that was when I realized this wasn't over. He wouldn't go quietly. He couldn't. Not after building his whole identity on being the man in charge. He would come after me, in ways louder, dirtier, and more dangerous than a boardroom argument. And while part of me thrilled at the power I finally held, another part knew I had just declared war. The meeting ended not with applause, but with murmurs, as investors surrounded me with questions and Victor stormed out, his tie loosened, his mask cracked. I should have felt triumphant, but as I watched him stalk down the hallway, I felt a prickle of unease. Because the way he looked back at me, just once, before disappearing into the elevator, it wasn't the look of a man defeated. It was the look of a man planning his revenge. The days after that meeting felt like living in a spotlight I had never asked for, and Victor wasted no time trying to make that light burn me alive. At first it was subtle. Industry whispers, concerned emails from acquaintances I hadn't heard from in years, all hinting that I had stolen my own work. A blog post appeared overnight under a pseudonym, claiming that the real architect of the invention was the management team and that I was an opportunist trying to hijack a $1 million deal. It was almost laughable, except that people believed it. By the third day, a trade magazine picked it up and ran a headline that made my stomach knot: "Engineer accused of undermining $1 million contract." The comments section was merciless. "She's just a techie who got greedy. Classic case of not knowing her place. She'll ruin it for everyone." I wanted to scream, to claw the words off the screen, but instead I poured myself another cup of bitter coffee and reminded myself why I had filed that patent in the first place. Victor was behind it, I had no doubt. His fingerprints were all over the smear campaign, the phrasing, the timing, the precision of the narrative. He was trying to isolate me, to make me look unstable and disloyal before the investors could solidify their support. And for a moment, I almost wondered if he would succeed. My inbox filled with messages from recruiters rescinding interviews, from colleagues distancing themselves. Even my landlord asked me quietly if my lease was still secure, as if gossip could evict me faster than rent arrears. But then I remembered something. Victor had once sent me an email late at night, sloppy and arrogant, where he admitted the invention was Inessa's crazy idea that somehow worked. I remembered because I had laughed at the phrasing, even saved the email as proof of his backhanded acknowledgement. If I could find it, if I could piece together enough of his careless words, I could build a shield against his lies. I spent 2 nights digging through archives, backups, even old USB drives from my grad school days, my apartment floor littered with hard drives and tangled cables. The clock glowed past 3 a.m. When I finally saw it, his name in the from field, his words plain as day, her prototype, her system, I'll polish it for the board. My hands shook as I screenshotted, printed, backed it up 6 different ways. It was more than a slip, it was an admission. A thread I could pull until his whole sweater unraveled. The next morning, I drafted a timeline of every message, every file, every memo that pointed to me as the true origin. It felt like building a case brick by brick, not just for myself, but for every engineer who'd ever been erased by someone louder in a suit. Still, Victor was relentless. He called me directly, voice syrupy at first: "Inessa, this doesn't have to be ugly. Sign the assignment and I'll make sure you're acknowledged." When I refused, the sweetness curdled into venom. "You think a patent makes you untouchable? I'll bury you in legal fees. You'll be radioactive by the time I'm done." I hung up before he could finish, my hand trembling not with fear but fury. He wanted a war? He was going to get one. I took my evidence to a lawyer recommended by the gray-haired investor, and for the first time I said the words out loud: "I want to file a claim." The lawyer, calm and sharp-eyed, scanned the documents and nodded slowly. "This isn't just defense," she said. "This is grounds for fraud." The words settled in the air like thunder. Fraud. That meant Victor's career wasn't just at risk, it was hanging over a pit. I walked home that night through streets buzzing with neon and drizzle, my head swimming with exhaustion and adrenaline. I knew Victor wouldn't stop, that he'd use every dirty trick in the book to smear me further, to drag me into the mud where he was most comfortable. But I also knew something he couldn't stomach. The truth was already on my side, and the higher he raised his voice, the more desperate he looked. As I collapsed into bed, clutching the printout of his email like a talisman, I whispered to myself, "Patience, Inessa. Patience." Because I didn't just want to defend myself anymore. I wanted to destroy him the way he had tried to erase me. And now I finally had the match to light the fuse. When I finally decided to go on the offensive, it wasn't with a whisper but with a thunderclap. I filed the lawsuit, Not just against Victor, but against the company itself, for fraud and attempted misappropriation of intellectual property. And the moment the papers hit the docket, the story leapt from industry gossip to front-page headlines in every business journal worth its subscription. Suddenly, I wasn't just the engineer who might have stolen an idea. I was the woman suing her former boss for trying to erase her from a $1 million invention. Reporters camped outside my apartment building, microphones shoved at me when I tried to grab groceries, cameras flashing when I left the lawyer's office. At first it rattled me. I wasn't built for spectacle, I was built for blueprints and stubborn calculations. But then I realized something. Visibility, the very thing Victor had denied me for years, was now my greatest weapon. The more the world saw me, the harder it was for him to pretend I didn't exist. And people were starting to rally. Articles shifted tone, calling me the underdog, the quiet genius, the engineer who fought back. Social media lit up with women in STEM posting my name alongside their own stories of being minimized, erased, written out. Victor hated it. I knew because the next morning, his lawyer called mine with an offer. He wanted me to settle. He wanted me to sign a non-disclosure agreement, to assign the patent back to the company, and in return he promised me a generous payout and credit as a contributor. Contributor. The word was poison. I almost laughed, but my lawyer answered for me. My client isn't interested. That should have been the end of it, but Victor wasn't wired to accept defeat. The next day, a black car pulled up beside me as I left the courthouse, and the window rolled down. There he was, in his immaculate suit, sunglasses hiding the storm in his eyes. "Get in," he said, voice like gravel. I didn't. "We could end this, Inessa," he murmured, leaning across the leather seat, "and you could walk away with more money than you've ever seen. All you have to do is be smart, sign, and let me handle the rest." I stared at him, my reflection fractured in the glass. "You mean let you erase me again?" I said. His jaw tightened. "Do you think these investors care about you? They want results. They need a face they trust, and that's me. I'm giving you a chance to cash out before you lose everything." For a flicker of a second, I felt the old fear, the familiar weight of being outnumbered, outmaneuvered. But then I remembered the folder of emails, the patent copies, the chorus of voices online chanting my name like a banner. I leaned closer to his open window and said, "I don't want your money, Victor. I want the truth. And the truth destroys you." His sunglasses slipped just enough for me to see it, the flicker of panic behind the rage. He pulled away with a screech of tires, and I knew then he wasn't bargaining anymore. He was scrambling. Days later, the investors convened without him, calling me directly to negotiate licensing under my terms. It was surreal, hearing people who had once ignored me now treat me like the axis of the entire deal. But the real showdown was still ahead. The court date loomed, and Victor, cornered, doubled down. He flooded the docket with motions, tried to bury me in paperwork, even leaked false testimonies that I had sabotaged the company. But each move backfired, because with every desperate swing he revealed himself for what he was, a man drowning. The night before the hearing, my lawyer and I sat surrounded by files, and she looked at me over her glasses. "Tomorrow is the kill shot," she said softly. "Are you ready for this?" I thought of every dismissal, every meeting where my ideas were stolen, every time Victor smiled while cutting me out of my own work. I thought of that $1 million glowing on the screen while they toasted without me. And I nodded. I've been ready since the day he said my name didn't matter. The next morning the courthouse steps were a storm of cameras and voices, but I walked through them steady, patent folder under my arm like a sword. Victor was already inside, pacing, his charm cracked, his aura gone. When he saw me, he tried to smirk, but it looked more like a grimace. He leaned toward me as I passed and hissed, "You'll regret this." I didn't even pause. "You first," I whispered back. And then the doors opened, and the clerk called our case. As I sat at the plaintiff's table, heart hammering like a drum, I realized something monumental. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every invisible engineer, every silenced woman, every erased name. And when the judge entered and the room rose to its feet, I knew with absolute certainty that Victor's empire was about to collapse, and my revenge was about to be sealed in ink. The courtroom that morning felt like the center of the universe, though it smelled of old varnish and recycled air. Cameras clicked outside as I pushed through the heavy doors, my patent folder clutched like a shield. On the other side of the aisle sat Victor, immaculately dressed as always, but his posture betrayed him, shoulders tight, jaw ticking like a clock about to break. The judge called the case, and suddenly the room belonged to evidence, not ego. My lawyer began with the basics, my patent application, timestamped and notarized, filed in my own name long before the company even knew what the invention could become. Each document appeared on the screen in bold, undeniable clarity. Victor pretended calm, but I saw his fingers twitch against the table. His attorney countered with their showpiece, a stack of notebooks allegedly proving Victor's authorship. The jury leaned in, curious, but when my lawyer projected one page, she pointed to a faint watermark, paper stock ordered months after the alleged date of the entry. A murmur rolled across the gallery. Another page referenced a code commit that didn't exist at the time. The cracks in Victor's fortress widened. Then came the recording. The junior lawyer, the same one who had whispered at the celebration, played back Victor's own words. "We'll push signatures after closing. She doesn't know what the assignment means. If she balks, I'll bury her in paper." The audio filled the courtroom, smooth and venomous, and the jury stared at Victor like he'd just confessed to theft on live television. He paled but tried to recover, launching into a speech about leadership, vision, and how engineers provide ingredients while management cooks the meal. It might have swayed someone once, but today the room belonged to facts, not metaphors. My lawyer asked for permission to demonstrate. I loaded the compiled build of the software Victor had presented to investors, ran a test dataset, and waited. After 16 cycles, the hidden macro I had written years ago activated, printing in the log, origin, Inessa Cade license required. Gasps erupted. The judge raised an eyebrow. My lawyer calmly explained that the watermark had been documented in my notebooks and proved the code's true origin. Victor's lawyer shouted about sabotage, but the forensic expert testified it had no effect on performance, only on demonstration mode. The truth was burned into the software itself. Still, Victor wasn't finished. His team called the company's HR director, who held up the handbook and insisted my work fell under company property. But under cross-examination, she admitted there was no signed IP assignment from me, no reimbursement for the patent filing, no explicit clause covering independent inventions. 3 notes that echoed like hammers on stone. Then the gray-haired investor testified about Victor's secret side letter, promising him a personal fee if the deal closed under his terms. It was bribery dressed as business, and when her voice rang out in my words, yes, it was a kickback, I saw jurors' pens scratching like chisels carving his guilt. By the time closing arguments ended, the verdict was already written in their faces. The judge delivered it plainly. The patent was mine, Victor's documents were fraudulent, and the company had attempted unlawful misappropriation. Injunctive relief was granted, damages to be decided later. Then, almost as an afterthought, the judge added that Victor's conduct would be referred to the state bar. His head snapped up, eyes wide for the first time all day. He was not just beaten, he was ruined. The twist came after. In the corridor, reporters swarmed, microphones shoved into my face, but through the noise I saw the gray-haired investor step forward. "Miss Cade," she said, her hand firm in mine, "we'd like to restructure the deal. With you as the licensor. Clean, transparent, and profitable." My breath caught. For years I had dreamed of someone speaking to me that way, not as a ghost in the machine, but as the center of it. Before I could answer, Victor appeared, disheveled now, his mask gone. "You can't trust her," he spat. "She's reckless. She'll sink you all." His voice cracked in desperation. The investor turned, cold as steel. "What sinks us is fraud. What saves us is ownership." Security hovered, but Victor didn't lunge. He just looked at me with eyes that no longer held arrogance, only emptiness. "You won't survive without me," he said, his last card. I stepped closer so every camera could catch it. I already did. 1 week later I signed the new agreement. A licensing deal that gave me royalties, independence, and funding to build a lab under my own name. Reporters wrote about me as the engineer who fought back, but to me it was simpler. I had taken back what was mine. Victor resigned to pursue opportunities no one believed existed, his reputation ash in the wind. When the first wire transfer arrived, I didn't celebrate with champagne. I bought a plain fireproof cabinet, slid my patent into the drawer, and shut it with a click. Ownership, safety, future, all locked where no one could erase me again. That night, I walked past the glass tower where they once toasted without me. My reflection stared back in the dark windows, steady and unbroken. Above me, neon hummed. Inside me, something lighter than triumph bloomed. It was peace, the kind that comes when the world finally speaks your name out loud. I whispered it just once, for myself, Inessa. And for the first time, it didn't sound invisible. It sounded untouchable.